Rae Town is a university. This was a saying often repeated by people who lived in and around the community. To reside in Rae Town for any length of time and survive meant that you had most likely graduated from the school of hard knocks. One of my neighbors once said Rae Town carried so much negativity because we had the prison, Tower Street General Penitentiary, or GPS some would call it, on one side of the community, the mental asylum known as Bellevue on another, the police station to the north, and the only escape to the south was to drown yourself in Rae Town Beach. As depressing as that sounded, it was not all bad. Rae Town was home to some of the most talented, educated, funniest, and compassionate people in Jamaica, perhaps even in the world. On the other hand, it also had a small minority who were among the lowest of the low. I firmly believe the overseer of the new home my mother and I moved into was one of the vilest people I've ever met. He was about 6 feet tall, already graying, and had a heavy appetite for drinking and smoking. He and his wife were complete opposites. Where he was loud, she was soft spoken. Where he was slender, she was plump. They both worked during the day, though he often came home before she did. Almost every Sunday, they dressed in blue and white and went off to church. I could never understand how he could be drunk most days, yet still get dressed and go to church every Sunday, but he did. The community was close knit, though filled with many nosy people who pretended to mind their own business but rarely succeeded. Every street had little corners where people gathered to chat, gamble, play football, braid hair, or simply stroll about. During the week, mothers and sometimes fathers would ensure their children were sent off to school and the street would remain calm until dismissal time. Things became livelier in the evenings, and Rae Town had multiple shops, bars on every street, and vendors sold goods from stalls on the corner. Some yards was more than just homes. They doubled as shops themselves, where you could pass through a gate and buy anything from bread to soap without ever stepping into a formal store. When we moved into the room on Potter's Row, there was a huge dump site directly in front of the yard. Beside it stood a small yard shop run by an elderly couple who sold all sorts of items, including alcohol. It seems that shop never closed because in the wee hours of the morning you could still hear drunk men arguing at the top of their voices. The dump site ran along the wall of one of the largest tenement yards in Rae Town. At the front stood a two-story building where a dressmaker lived upstairs. The entire top floor of that building was made of wood and looked so old it seemed ready to topple over at any moment. Much of the housing stock in the community of Rae Town resembled that building. Though many people tried their best to keep their homes decent, lack of money and employment meant they could barely manage it. Like many low income communities, Rae Town had people who did whatever honest work they could to survive while others stay on the corner to hustle. Hustling could mean begging, selling odds and ends, or engaging in illegal or questionable activities just to meet their daily needs. Some people hustled because they had no choice, others simply wanted to. The weekends were when the hustling reached its peak. There was always some kind of street dance taking place and music blared from bars across the community. On Sundays, as early as 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you could hear the sound check beginning for Rae Town Holits. Rae Town Holits was a traditional open air street dance held on the road parallel to mine, but the speakers were so loud the bass felt as though it was coming from my chest. The music often played until daybreak on the morning, and vendors sold soup, cook food, snacks, liquor, all of those things. The first time I saw a Rasta man openly selling marijuana there, I was in awe. This was where hustling thrived. Youths charged for parking security, women flocked to affluent looking men, and every form of roadside gambling, from Ludo or Ludi, according to Jamaicans, to dominoes, to card games, took place there. Many Monday mornings, as I left for school, the sound system was only then beginning to be packed away. Like many inner city communities, Rae Town also had its share of crime and violence. There were several gangs and plenty of girls who had run in with each other. By the time I moved there, the general election had already passed more than a year earlier, but my mother still warned me to be careful about walking to school. Southside and Raytown sat on opposite political lines, and the tension never fully subsided. Often I would be inside when I heard people running hurriedly, gates slamming and neighbors peering through windows as young men raced down the roads with guns in hands, battling with each other. Raytown had always been a PNP stronghold, while Southside was known as a JLP enclave. I could never understand how my mother managed to walk through all those communities despite the dangers. But she did, just to be able to sell her peanuts to be able to provide for our family. My first year living on Potter's Row was an adjustment, one I was excited for. My mother decided to stop selling at the intersection of Margaret Street and Windward Road, and instead, she decided to walk through communities selling her peanuts. This meant she was not at home most evening, but much like our time on Wellington Street, she would leave instructions for what I needed to do before she returned home at night. Unlike Wellington Street, I now had plenty of little friends who played dandy shandy and street baseball right outside of my gate, and they quickly distracted me from my chores. My mother did not believe in sparing the rod and spoiling the child, so many evenings I either rushed to complete my task when I saw her coming down the road, or I would end up getting a beating if she happened to take another route and surprise me. By the end of first form and the beginning of second form, I had already made friends in Raytown. The new environment, though similar to Wellington Street, had a more positive effect on me. I no longer dwelled on my father or the incident involving Shine Brown in St. Anne. At the end of first form, my mother enrolled me in Saturday math class at Maranatha Church in Franklin Town to help with my failing grades. Uncle Bob, who taught Sunday school on Water Street, also attended Maranatha Church, and he was our maths teacher. I attended my usual classes during the week and math classes on Saturdays. My passion for reading had dwindled because I was now more interested in playing with my friends, spending time with them. But I still read, but this was mostly Mills and Boons and Harlequin Desire romance novels. I'd also begun to take a keen interest in boys, though I was unsure whether they liked me in return. My siblings had teased me so much that I believe I was an ugly duckling with big forehead and large front teeth. The rejection I'd felt as a child only strengthened my belief that I was not beautiful. But not only was I making friends, I also developed my first real crush, which eventually led to my first kiss. I still sometimes stop by Miss Lou's place on my way home from Saturday class, and occasionally I stayed there until my mother came for me. My mother had no issues with me reading romance novels, but she warned me harshly not to act on anything I'd read in the novels. She would say, if you fuck, you breed, and if you breed, don't bring it in my room. Anywhere you catch a cold, you blow your nose. It did not take much to understand what she meant. I already had seen what happened between her and my first sister. Still, that did not stop me from writing letters to my crush. Letters that I was too frightened to hand over to him, and so I hid them in my school books. One day, my mother found one of them and ranted for hours about it. She said, "A man you want now? Eh? You are bus breast, so you think you're big now, don't? Not in here, not under my roof." This was followed by many expletives. She confiscated all of my romance novels and ordered me to read my school book instead. In response to this, I became creative girl. I hid novels inside of textbook, under the mattress, and behind the toilet bowl in the bathroom, which was my favorite hiding place, since I was the only one who cleaned the toilet anyway. I would spend hours sitting on the toilet bowl reading after making sure the bathroom door was firmly shut. By then, through reading and classes at school, I understood the female reproductive system. I also understood the consequences of intercourse through watching my mother, observing my eldest sister's life, and hearing my mother's blunt warning about this. There was little to no gentle conversation, no thoughtful guidance, only fear and stern commands. My mother was parenting the only way she knew how and the only way she was brought up. One Saturday morning, I woke up with cramps in my abdomen and lower back. When I went to the bathroom, I noticed blood on my underwear. I sat quietly for a while, trying to decide what to do. I knew what it was, but I did not know how to feel about what was happening to my body. It had already begun to grow hair under my arms and in other places on my body, but I'd kept that hidden from my mother. It was my private little secret. This, however, could not be hidden. To my surprise, the news softened her demeanor. She crowed happily. "Ya get big now, man. You can't make nobody touch you this in a hand, 'cause you will breed if you make them touch you." And with that, she went out and purchased a pack of stay-free sanitary napkins and even told me that when she first got her period, she had to use bird eye cloth because her family could not afford sanitary products. Naturally, she and the woman in the yard gossip and chat about my first period, and they also reminisced about their own. Meanwhile, I felt I needed to see a doctor because surely this pain and discomfort could not be normal for any woman. The sanitary napkin also felt bulky and awful, and I was convinced everybody could see it when I walk. I hated the experience. In home economics class, we were taught that women carried a little pouch in their bags containing an extra sanitary napkin, underwear, painkillers, and small items to freshen up. I did not receive a pouch at home, but I learned to sew one in class and was thrilled to have my own lady pouch. Naturally, I showed it off proudly to many of the girls in class as I could. I was grown, or so I believed. To my dismay, the news of my period also reached the overseer. My heart sank when he approached me one day and said, "Me hear say ya big woman now. Be careful of them boys out a road, you know. No make none of them touch your breast and pum pum on a big man alone for do that." I stared at him in disgust. His wife walked by and giggled and told him to leave the child alone, man. Then she turned to me and laughed. She said, "Now take him serious. Him no mean it, but you have to be careful for true." At that moment, I wish my mother had said nothing at all to them. He made comments like that often, and they felt really dirty. I tried to ignore him many times, and at the time, he seemed more focused on his stepdaughter, and I believe I had nothing to worry about as long as his wife was at home. Going into my second form at Alpha Academy felt very different from my first year. I now knew my way around the campus and already had eaten a few mangoes and grapes from the forbidden trees without getting caught. I felt at ease with the layout of the school. Additionally, a few other children from Rae Town had been granted places at Alpha Academy High School. At that time, securing a seat at one of the traditional high schools, such as Convent of Mercy, Academy Alpha, Immaculate, Excelsior, and other high schools in the corporate area, was considered a major achievement. You were seen as highly intelligent, or, as Jamaicans would say, yeah, bright sparks. No, I had friends to walk to and from school with. We cackled and laughed our way along the long trek up and down South Camp Road. Unfortunately, my grades were progressing at the same pace as first form. It was going downhill really fast. We had new teachers in second form as well, but the one who inspired the most fear in me was my math teacher, Miss Morris. In my mind, Miss Morris was a phenomenon. She walked with measured step and never seemed to be in a hurry. Yet, the moment you turn away and assume she would not reach a classroom for another hour, she would somehow appear at the door within seconds. All of us in the class were convinced she could time travel and that she was an alien. Miss Morris did not tolerate noise. Not even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard in her class. She spoke as though she counted every word and wrote on the blackboard with the same slow, deliberate motion. I could not stand Miss Morris. Why? Because absolute silence was required the moment she entered the room. No chair could scrape the ground, no desk could move. If one did this, we would spend the entire math session standing outside on the hot tennis court. You could also not mispronounce words beginning with TH. I made that mistake once and had to write 200 lines. I had to write the word is three and not tree 200 times. I prayed every day that Miss Morris would be transferred to another school, but my prayers went unanswered. To make matters worse, maths class was usually the first session every Monday morning. That meant Monday evenings were often spent writing lines or facing demerit or detention for homework I had not completed. I would be too buried in a romance novel or too distracted by my friends to prepare properly. And so Mondays were usually the worst day of the week for me at school. Now, midterm results arrive along with a thorough trashing from my mother for the grades. Miss Morris' feedback was the harshest of all, and after speaking with her, my mother declared she did not want to hear from any other teacher. My mother she owned a hairbrush for her thick curly hair, and she often used this hairbrush to flog me with it, and she did so for failing nearly all of my subjects. It was safe to say I was slacking badly. And after that, I even managed to receive a D in physical education. Even though that memory stings, my mother will slap me so hard that by the time she finished, I was swollen all over, which only drew giggles from the little girl who lived in the yard. Towards the end of second form, my troubles deepened. My mother had promised to buy the school swimsuit so I could take swimming lessons in the big, beautiful school at Alpha. I begged since first form, but the swimsuit never appeared. One day, I stood by the pool when an older girl from Rae Town, dressed in her sixth form uniform, greeted me warmly and asked if I was taking swimming classes. I told her no. When she asked me why, I explained that I had no swimsuit. As luck would have it, she was on the swim team and had several swimsuits, some that were much smaller than her. So she gave me one of hers, and I said nothing to my mother since I was supposed to be taking netball for physical education. I then approached Mr. White, the swim teacher, and asked if I could join the swimming classes. He gave me a form for my mother to sign, and I forged her signature. I knew she was already furious over my grades and still angry that she could not find the airbrush that she used to beat me with. What she didn't know was that I had thrown away every replacement airbrush she bought just to avoid getting beaten with it. Before long, I was attending swimming lessons and even staying after school in the hopes of joining the swim team. I told my mother I was staying back to do homework and she accepted the explanation. Then one day, I forgot the wet swimsuit in my dirty clothes, and my mother found it. I was sitting in class in the second form building when I was summoned to the school office. I was surprised because this had never happened before. There in the school office, my mother was standing demanding to know why I was taking swimming lessons without her permission. The confrontation led not only to a detention but another severe beating. This time, the overseer intervened and begged my mother to stop beating me. He saw how bad it was, and he said he would speak to me, and after much persuasion, my mother agreed. That was how he got closer to me. Through my tears, he spoke, but I barely listened. I was only 12, nearly 13, and wish I could turn back the hands of time and do everything differently. I was so sorry that I was disappointed my mother. I was so sorry that she was ashamed at the school to find out that I'd forged her signature, and most of all, I was so sorry that this man intervened. I decided then and there that I would try to be a much better student and a better daughter to my mother, and in that way, the man would not have to intervene anymore in our problems. There were times when we would all be sitting in their living room watching television because we didn't have a TV in our room. While we were sitting watching television, he would call his stepdaughter into his bedroom, close the door, and remain in that bedroom with his stepdaughter for long periods of time. He was only a few years older than I was, perhaps 15 years old. But even then, I knew something about it felt wrong. It did not matter whether or not his wife was at home. Her being in that bedroom with her stepfather for such long period of time just seems unnerving. Sometimes on Saturdays, when everyone was around, especially if his wife was having issues disciplining his daughter, he would step in and call the girl into the room. After this happened several times, we could hear her crying and begging to be let out, while her mother, who heard it too, did nothing. Once I asked the mother if she was not going to see why her daughter was crying in the room while being locked up with her stepfather. She replied to me, "Not no do her. Him only a talk to her. Him not do her nothing. Just ignore them and mind your business." There was also a younger girl that was living with the couple, about 2 or 3 years younger than I was. He never behaved strangely with that little girl, at least not in any way I witnessed. Later on, I learned that he and his wife were living there primarily to act as guardians for that child. Her family had migrated to America and needed someone to care for her. The wife had been given that responsibility and moved into the larger section of the house, and eventually her husband joined her and took on the role of overseer for the property. Saturdays were when everyone seemed to be home. My mother, however, sold her peanuts every day except for Sundays, which meant that many Saturday evenings I was left at home with the overseer, his wife, and the two girls that were in their care. I tried to avoid him as much as possible, so attending math classes was also always a welcome escape. The added blessing was that Uncle Bob, who taught our class, was so gifted that I actually began to enjoy mathematics. By the time I entered third form, my maths grade had improved significantly. After classes, I would walk through Franklin Town and down Water Street to get home. Many days I lingered along the way, stopping by Miss Lou's place in hopes of catching a glimpse of my crush. Around that time, a new family moved into the house next door to Miss Lou. Their daughter also attended Alpha, and she and I quickly became friends, even best friends. We walked home from school together and talked about everything under the sun most days. She felt like a sister I could tell anything to. Sometimes she invited me inside to meet her mom and her little brother, and they often shared their meals with me. It felt wonderful to have a friend whose family welcomed me instead of making me feel like an outsider. Eventually, her mother met my mother, and they agreed that we could visit each other's home to do homework. I was overjoyed by the arrangement. On days when we arrived home before her mother, we rushed through our homework and then spent hours talking and laughing like teenage girls did. My first kiss happened during that season of my life. My crush had already begun stopping to chat with me from time to time, and on one Valentine's Day, he had brought me a fake rose, and I did everything in my power to hide it from my mother. Nothing could have burst my little happy bubble then. He was tall, slender, handsome, and a year older than I was. You could not convince me that this was not real love. This was love that I didn't find from my father, from certain persons, and my crush was just giving it to me. My best friend often described what kissing someone felt like. At that time, I had never kissed someone before, and I wondered if my first kiss would be as magical as she claimed hers had been. Was I grown? No. Did I think I was grown? Absolutely. Jamaicans will call it force ripe. One evening, as I was leaving Miss Lou's house, my crush was entering the yard to speak with her, and in the dark passageway we collided. He hugged me and kissed me, and I let it happen. In that moment, I forgot every stern warning my mother had ever given to me. Looking back, I can honestly say it was barely more than a peck. But if you heard me recounting it to my best friend afterwards, what? You would have thought that it was some kind of kiss found only in romance novels. I did not know what a French kiss was, but my know it all best friend immediately informed me that that was a French kiss. I was so delighted. In my mind, the only logical next step was for us to be married and ride off into the sunset together. Of course, I was barely 13 years old and failing half of my classes, so that fantasy was wildly delusional. I came crashing back to earth when my highly knowledgeable best friend informed me that there was a chance I could be pregnant from a French kiss. He had heard that people could contract HIV from one and therefore reasoned that pregnancy must also be possible through this means. Every alarm bell in my 13-year-old brain went off. There was no logical thinking other than what my best friend had told me. I prayed day and night that I was not pregnant. Because what would I do? Where would I go? Would I have to move in with my crush's family? Would my mother beat me for getting pregnant from a French kiss? All these questions swirled through my head. When my period came late that month, I lost my appetite. I developed diarrhea from stress and worry. Even my mother noticed that I was losing weight and seemed distracted. My best friend promised that she would be an excellent godmother to the baby, and I almost died. I was fully convinced that I was doomed and was pregnant. I decided that the only way to soften the blow for my mother was to bring home decent end of term grades, and spent more time at home doing my chores. In the end, my ghost pregnancy delayed my period only slightly. The stress of worrying about all of this meant nothing, but it taught me what I believe was a valuable lesson at the time. Stay away from boys for now. To make matters worse, my crush disappeared soon after. I later heard that he was sent to Port Royal to live with his family, and my heart broke so hard. But my focus was now on my schoolwork. I began spending more time at my gate with my friends or occasionally next door, but I completed my chores and I ensured to do my homework. Meanwhile, my mother's feet began to crack badly at the heels again, and I worried that she would believe someone was putting obia on her once more. Still, life moved on. By third form, I was furious to discover I had the same math teacher as second form. Can you believe it? At home, I was also having more run-ins with the overseer. His stepdaughter was no longer living there, and he seemed to be drinking even more than before. More than once, he came home reeking of J. Ray and Neville rum. His smoking increased as well, and I hated the smell of him. He was also becoming far too familiar with my mother. He would playfully try to hug her in front of his wife, who treated it as a joke. When his wife was absent, he passed by my mother, and I would hear her snap, what do you saw? Mister not touch me. He would only laugh in reply. Oh, ya gwan, sir, he would say. I just play with you. My mother was not amused, and she would complain to his wife. Please talk to your man now. Me no want him to touch me up. To which the wife would casually respond, why you are tell me? Tell him yourself. At the same time, money was becoming much tighter. Another woman on our road had started selling peanuts and was using the same route as my mother. This meant sales had dropped, as expected. Many days my lunch money was little or non existent. My mother would urge me to eat breakfast, carry a little syrup and ice in my little igloo cooler to school, and come home for dinner. We became extremely frugal in every possible way. Some nights dinner was late because my mother had to walk further to sell enough peanuts just to break even and buy more stock. On top of that, she increasingly complained of feeling weak, and some of the patches in her hair was falling out. My aunt by that time had migrated to America and was not able to offer my mom any help. I begged my mother to go see a doctor, but she refused outright. Because I was spending more time at home, I interacted more with the overseer, his wife, the younger girl they cared for. He often sat but with our little group at the gate in the afternoon, chatting idly. The first time the overseer approached me directly, I was stunned that he would even try to do this. The younger girl had been sitting and eating on the veranda, and I was so hungry I asked her for a little of her food. She snapped at me that I begged too much, and he overheard. When I retreated to my room to nurse both my hurt feelings and my hunger, he knocked and entered without an invitation. He comforted me and told me never to ask the girl for anything again. He said she was selfish and did not like me. And I was confused. Why is an adult involving himself in children's argument? And wasn't he supposed to be her guardian? But then in that same conversation, he offered me money and he said he had two conditions for me accepting the money: that I tell my mother nothing and that I would do him a favor, but that he was not ready to name the favor. The thought of owing him anything made me want to throw up. I told him I did not need the money because my mother would soon be home. He heard a sound behind him and he glanced towards the open door and noticed that the little girl was standing there. Then he turned back to me and said that that was fine, but I should let him know when I changed my mind. He then walked out of the room, and it felt as though the Grim Reaper had entered to claim a soul but left empty handed. I said nothing to my mother. Our relationship was strained. My grades were poor, and she believed I had grown stubborn with age. She cursed me often. More than that, I feared if I told her and she confronted this man, we would be given notice and we would be homeless again. By then, my best friend and I had drifted apart. I felt there was no one I could confide in, and I felt completely alone. So I made a decision. Whenever I was home, my door would remain shut and I would stay as far away from that man as possible. One day, as I sat in class, I felt the familiar ache in my lower back and belly that usually announced the arrival of my period. I felt miserable and I wanted nothing more than to lie down. My class teacher noticed my discomfort and asked if I was okay. When I explained that I was having cramps, she sent me to the school nurse, who took my temperature and blood pressure and gave me a painkiller, and she even offered me another sanitary napkin and a cot to rest on. Closer to the end of the school day, she asked whether I felt well enough to walk home since they were unable to contact my mother and have her come to take me home. I told her that I was okay to go home, and I thought if I got home early, I could take a shower and lay down and, feel much better. When I reached home, I went straight to the bathroom. My mother was not there, surprisingly. I assumed maybe she had gone out early to make early sales, or possibly she had gone to the market. And the yard was unusually quiet. Well, good, I thought. Some peace and quiet to take a long shower and then go lay down. After 5 minutes into the shower, I heard a knock at the bathroom door. Thinking it was my mom, I called out, "Yes, the door open, mommy, come in." What happened next sent a chill racing down my spine. A scream rose to the back of my throat and never made it past my lips. As the shower curtain shifted, the sharp smell of J. Ray and nephew flooded my nostrils. I looked up and saw the overseer stepping into the shower fully clothed, moving steadily towards me while my 13-year-old body stood naked beneath the running water. I froze. I could not process what was happening. Dear God, please wake me up from this nightmare. Thank you for listening to another chapter in my book, A Journey from Jamaica to Becoming. Remember to like, subscribe, and share, and leave a comment in the comment section under this video. Thank you again for watching. Until I see you in the next one.